In October 1962, for 13 days, the Cold War stopped being cold, and the world stood on the edge of a fire it could never put out. This was not a distant threat, not a theoretical war. It was real, immediate, and seconds away from becoming irreversible. Missiles were armed, submarines were ready, leaders were waiting, and the fate of humanity rested not on certainty, but on fear, miscalculation, and the terrifying possibility that someone, somewhere, might act too soon. At the heart of the Cold War was a contradiction that defined an entire era. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, both armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy the planet, locked in a confrontation they could never fully engage in, because to fight directly meant mutual destruction. So instead, they fought everywhere else, through influence, through proxy wars, through espionage, through pressure. It was a balance sustained not by peace, but by the constant threat of annihilation. After World War II, the global order had been shattered. Europe was no longer the center of power. Its cities lay in ruins, its economies crippled. Into that vacuum stepped two nations with radically different visions for the future. The United States promoted capitalism, open markets, and democratic governance. The Soviet Union stood for centralized control, communist ideology, and the expansion of its influence across Eastern Europe and beyond. Each side believed it was shaping the future. Each side believed the other was a threat that could not be tolerated. But beneath the ideology was something far more dangerous: human fallibility. Leaders who misread intentions, intelligence that was incomplete, assumptions that hardened into certainty. In a world armed with nuclear weapons, even a small error could trigger a chain reaction with no end. And by the early 1960s, that risk was no longer theoretical. It was building, quietly, relentlessly. In 1959, a revolution in Cuba brought a new government to power, one that aligned itself with the Soviet Union. For the United States, this was more than a political shift. It was a strategic threat sitting just off its coastline. Attempts to remove this new regime failed, most notably in the Bay of Pigs invasion. And that failure did more than embarrass the United States. It exposed weakness. It created opportunity. The Soviet leadership saw that opportunity clearly. The United States had nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey within striking distance of Soviet territory. From Moscow's perspective, the balance was uneven. The solution was bold and dangerous. If missiles could be placed in Cuba, the strategic equation would change overnight. The United States would feel the same pressure the Soviet Union had been living under. The plan moved forward in secrecy. Ships carried missiles, troops, and equipment across the Atlantic. Installations were built quickly, hidden as best as possible. The goal was simple: complete the deployment before the United States could react. But history rarely follows plans so cleanly. In October 1962, American reconnaissance flights captured images that would change everything. Long shadows on Cuban soil, structures that did not belong. Analysts studied the photographs in silence, and then came the realization that shifted the world into a new phase of fear. Nuclear missiles were already there, operational, ready. The reaction inside the United States government was immediate, but not unified. Some demanded airstrikes to eliminate the threat. Others warned that such a move would trigger retaliation. A full-scale invasion was considered. So was inaction. Each option carried consequences that could not be reversed. Each decision felt like stepping into the unknown. President John F. Kennedy chose a path that balanced aggression with restraint. A naval quarantine would be established around Cuba. It was a word chosen carefully, not blockade, because blockade meant war, and war was precisely what had to be avoided, even as both sides prepared for it. As American naval forces moved into position, Soviet ships continued their approach. The distance between them shrank. Every mile became a question. Would they stop? Would they turn back? Or would they push forward, forcing a confrontation that neither side could control? Time slowed. The The world watched, but what the world saw was only a fraction of what was happening. Behind closed doors, messages were being drafted, revised, and delayed. Misunderstandings piled up. Intelligence reports conflicted. Leaders struggled to interpret not just actions, but intentions. And then something unexpected happened. Several Soviet ships slowed their advance. Some turned back. It looked for a moment like the crisis might be de-escalating. But that appearance hid a far more dangerous reality, because even as tensions seemed to ease above the surface, below it, events were spiraling toward disaster. A Soviet submarine, isolated and cut off from communication, found itself surrounded by American naval forces. The crew had been submerged for days. The air inside was growing thin. The heat was unbearable. Stress levels were rising. And then came the explosions. Depth charges dropped by U.S. ships, intended as signals, not attacks. But inside the submarine, there was no way to know that. To the crew, it sounded like war had already begun. Inside that vessel was a nuclear torpedo, a weapon powerful enough to devastate an entire fleet and trigger an unstoppable escalation. The protocol required agreement from 3 senior officers to launch. Under pressure, under fear, and under the belief that they were already under attack, 2 of those officers agreed. It made sense. In their reality, the war had started. Waiting meant destruction. Acting meant survival. But the 3rd officer hesitated. In that moment, the Cold War was no longer an abstract conflict between nations. It became something intensely human. A decision made in isolation, a judgment call shaped by doubt, a refusal to accept what seemed inevitable. He chose not to authorize the launch. Against the fear, against the pressure, against the logic of the moment, he said no. And with that decision, the chain reaction that could have led to nuclear war was stopped before it began. The Cold War, which had come closer than ever to turning hot, pulled back from the edge. Above the surface, negotiations continued. Messages between Washington and Moscow grew more direct. The tension, while still present, began to shift. Eventually, an agreement was reached. The Soviet Union would dismantle its missile sites in Cuba. The United States would secretly remove its missiles from Turkey and publicly commit not to invade Cuba. To the outside world, it appeared as a calculated resolution, a demonstration of control under pressure, a victory of diplomacy. But the reality was far more fragile, because what had nearly ignited World War III was not a single decision, but a system built on mistrust, fear, and the constant expectation of conflict. A system where information was incomplete, communication was delayed, and assumptions could become deadly. In the aftermath, both sides recognized the danger of that system. Direct communication lines were established, procedures were adjusted, efforts were made to reduce the risk of accidental war. But the underlying tension remained. The Cold War continued for decades, shaped by the memory of how close it had come to catastrophe. The Soviet Union would eventually collapse. The United States would stand as the dominant global power. The Cold War would officially end, but the forces that drove it, the fear, the competition, the need for control, did not disappear. They evolved, they adapted, they remained. Because history is rarely defined by the events that happen, but by the ones that almost do. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: the moment that could have ended everything did not unfold in a war room, or in front of cameras, or in the speeches that filled the headlines. It happened in silence, in uncertainty, in the mind of one individual forced to decide without knowing the full truth. We often believe that history is shaped by power, by strategy, by leaders making bold decisions, but sometimes it is shaped by hesitation, by restraint, by the refusal to act when everything suggests that action is necessary. The missile that was never launched, the order that was never given, the war that never began. Because in a world where destruction can be instant and absolute, the greatest act of strength may not be action, but control. And as long as that power exists, the question will remain:
If that day came again, would we step back from the edge or finally fall into the fire? If you want to explore more hidden moments that almost changed the course of history, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the most important stories are not about what happened, but about what nearly did.